The Hale Foundation's innovators. Gala glowed beneath chandeliers that looked like molten glass suspended in midair. Laughter rose from every table, polished and effortless, the kind of sound wealthy people made when they were certain life would always bend in their direction. I walked in behind my family unnoticed as usual, even though this night was supposed to celebrate visionaries shaping the future. I had no idea the next few minutes would be the moment decades of quiet humiliation snapped in half, triggered not by my voice, but by a red Bloomberg alert that would expose everything I had built far away from their hands, their expectations, and their approval. My mother adjusted her diamond shawl as if preparing for a televised interview. My father offered discreet nods to donors and board members, greeting them like he owned the room. To him, I was simply extra space in the family photo present, but irrelevant. Evan, my brother, casually draped a hand over his chair and smirked. "Don't bring up your job tonight. People come here to hear about real achievement," his favorite line. We sat at a prime table, close to the stage, close to the cameras, the kind of placement reserved for families who mattered. Every other guest seemed radiant, confident, unmistakably part of the world my parents adored. I blended into the background, which for them was ideal. The invisible child never embarrasses anyone. The orchestra shifted into a soft jazz number. Wine circulated. The room warmed with expensive charm. Whenever my father felt the comfort of being admired, cruelty followed with the ease of breathing. He lifted his glass. To Evan, he announced loud enough for nearby tables to turn soon to be a partner at Harrington and Rowe. A true standout. The pause that followed was perfectly crafted, just long enough to signal he had more to say, just long enough for humiliation to bloom. Unlike those who are still living paycheck to paycheck, his eyes slid toward me, casual and cutting. A soft ripple of laughter spread around our table. Polite, careful, but unmistakably real. My mother gave a sympathetic grimace that carried no actual sympathy. Evan glanced at me, amused. It was the familiar choreography of our household. My father threw the insult, the rest treated it like harmless entertainment, and I absorbed it silently. What none of them realized was that this would be the last time they ever spoke about me that way. The host's voice boomed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the main screens for a brief Bloomberg breaking update." My father chuckled. "Maybe this one will mention Evan's firm." My mother touched up her lipstick. "Well, it certainly won't involve Lydia." The ballroom's 8 massive LED screens went dark, then blazed red. Bloomberg breaking Cho Tech Innovations valued at $20 billion after record-breaking Series F. CEO Lydia Cho confirms new federal defense contract. The sound that followed wasn't silence, it was impact. A full-body hush that swallowed music, laughter, everything. The chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered. My father's jaw locked in mid-chew. Evan stared as though someone had rewritten physics. The broadcast rolled on mercilessly, footage of Chotech's quantum-secure communication chips, our labs, our patents, interviews with industry analysts calling the technology a historic shift in national cybersecurity. My name appeared again, then again, the larger. People twisted in their seats to look at me. Confusion, disbelief, dawning recognition. It moved across the ballroom like a slow, seismic wave. Faces I'd known my whole life were seeing me for the first time. My father blinked hard. My mother pressed both hands to her chest. Evan's mouth hung open like a door left ajar. The screen shifted again, revealing a single image. A woman standing in front of Hale Innovates headquarters, calm and assured, the sunlight catching her smile. My hair was tied back, my coat draped neatly, my posture unmistakably that of someone who no longer apologized for existing. It took a full heartbeat before anyone at my table connected that woman to the one sitting beside them. My father choked out, "That can't be." But the announcer finished the sentence for him. Founder and CEO Lydia Cho. Whispers rolled outward in every direction. She built that company. Is she on the guest list? Her tech's already in federal trials. Hale Foundation will want her as a donor. Evan reached for my arm. "Why didn't you say anything?" I slid my arm away. "You never asked. It wasn't spite. It was the truth. Clean, simple, undebatable." My father pushed back his chair, breath unsteady. Lydia, sweetheart, surely you didn't. But the screens now displayed every contract we had signed, every milestone we had hit, every accomplishment they had once deemed impossible for me. Every fact shredded years of their narrow assumptions. I stood slowly, the noise of my chair scraping against the floor, sounding louder than the orchestra had minutes earlier. The cameras moved with me, splashing my face across every screen, turning my existence into a fact the entire room had to confront. My mother's voice trembled. "Why would you hide this from us?" I met her eyes. "You taught me to." The shock on her face wasn't guilt, it was realization. All the years they had minimized me, underestimated me, treated me as an afterthought. None of it prepared them for a version of me that had built an empire outside their line of sight. I took a single step back from the table, then another. Conversations halted as I walked past, and as the ballroom parted for me like I was someone worthy of space. For the first time, a single clear thought settled in my mind. Their disbelief had nothing to do with the valuation. It came from finally understanding they no longer owned the narrative of who I was. I grew up in a house where achievement was measured the same way trophies were displayed. Only the ones belonging to my brother deserved a shelf. Evan won spelling bees, math competitions, summer science fairs. My mother documented every ribbon, every certificate, every minor triumph, as if she were curating the Hale family legacy. I existed in the background, helpful but forgettable. The child who set the table kept quiet during guests' visits and learned early that invisibility meant fewer reprimands. My father believed families functioned best when everyone understood their place. Evan was the prodigy, the investment, the future lawyer destined to carry the Hale name into boardrooms and country clubs. My mother shaped herself around that narrative with the precision of someone polishing an heirloom. I learned how to support it without becoming part of it. Whenever I tried to show initiative, the reactions from both of them created invisible walls. At 8, I built a small motorized toy car using spare parts from an old radio. My father glanced at it once before tossing it into a donation box. "You don't need to tinker," he said. "Focus on something you can manage." At 11, I tested into an advanced science program. My mother declined the offer on my behalf, saying it conflicted with Evan's weekend activities. At 15, I cracked a coding puzzle Evan struggled with for days. He brushed it off as luck, and my parents accepted that explanation without looking at the puzzle themselves. None of it surprised me. Dismissal became routine long before I learned to name it. High school solidified the dynamic. Evan's path remained a parade of curated accomplishments. My mother hovered over him like a campaign manager, correcting posture, arranging schedules, rehearsing interview answers. Whenever teachers praised my work or offered opportunities, she treated it as a clerical error. "She does fine," she would say. "Nothing exceptional." That phrase shaped the way people spoke to me, including relatives who decided early that talent was a limited resource in the Hale household, and I hadn't inherited enough to matter. College applications became the first arena where I tried to assert myself. My father insisted I choose something practical, meaning fields that supported Evan's future law career, accounting, administration, communications. I applied to a STEM program anyway and was accepted with a partial scholarship. Their disappointment came packaged as concern. "You'll overwhelm yourself," my mother warned. "Stay realistic." The word realistic tasted like a cage, but I swallowed it because fighting back in that house felt pointless. College opened a world they knew nothing about. I discovered people who didn't speak in hierarchies, professors who treated questions seriously, classmates who valued ability instead of pedigree. I found Professor Elias, who ran the university's low-profile hardware lab. Elias operated on verifiable results. He didn't care about the Hale name or Evan's latest mock trial victory. He needed code that worked and hardware that could handle intense thermal loads. I quickly became one of his most reliable research assistants because I delivered solutions without needing external validation. In Elias's low-profile lab, I found my language. It wasn't the polished rhetoric of boardrooms or the practiced confidence of Evan. It was the silent, absolute truth of hardware. I remember the first time Elias handed me a problem considered unsolvable by the previous graduate student, optimizing the thermal management of a new GPU chip design. It took 72 hours straight of coding and testing. I lived on lukewarm vending machine coffee and the sheer kinetic force of the challenge. When the simulation finally ran clean, Elias didn't praise my effort. He simply looked at the resulting data, clean, verifiable 15% better than the goal, and said, "This is a solution." That single fact-based acknowledgement was more nourishing than years of my father's empty compliments directed at Evan. In that lab, my value was a quantifiable metric. My gender was irrelevant. My family name held no weight. This was a sanctuary where results were the only currency. While Evan was busy rehearsing his moot court victory speeches and attending mandatory networking dinners, I was busy building something real where every line of code was a silent, unarguable fact proving my competence. That feeling, the quiet certainty of being seen by the code and the data, even if my family remained blind to it, was the engine that drove me forward. I didn't tell my family how well I was doing. Experience taught me that pride invited criticism. I took side jobs tutoring calculus and repairing old laptops to cover what the scholarship didn't. Evan, meanwhile, attended an elite private university, fully funded by our parents, something they described as a necessary investment. When I mentioned needing an extra physics textbook, my mother told me to check thrift stores. Graduation brought no celebration on their end. Evan's commencement was a catered event at the country club. Mine was a short drive home with a lukewarm congratulations from my father, who encouraged me to keep expectations modest. I accepted an entry-level research assistant position at a Boston tech lab. The job wasn't glamorous, but it placed me among people who saw potential instead of limitations. The lab was focused on cryptographic communications, dry, complex, and intensely rigorous work. I learned quickly, stayed late, absorbed everything. My value was measured by the cleanliness of my algorithms and the speed of my debugging, not by my social grace. Nobody called me average. Instead, they gave me projects and asked for solutions to problems that were deemed unsolvable by the previous team. I didn't tell my family the details. Their reactions were predictable anyway. Evan's life continued on rails paved for him. He landed coveted internships, all arranged through my parents' connections. Each phone call home turned into an update on his achievements, followed by a reminder that I should learn from his example. I listened quietly, because pushing back would only reinforce their belief that I was difficult. They didn't ask about my work. They only asked if I was managing. 2 years into the job, my supervisor encouraged me to join a confidential project researching quantum-secure communication frameworks. The offer came with a non-disclosure agreement and a significant pay increase. The project centered on developing a chip that could dynamically map real-time regulatory compliance onto encrypted data streams, a critical high-stakes application for both finance and government infrastructure. It required precise logic and the ability to work under immense unshared pressure. When I told my family I'd be moving closer to the research site, my father said, "You're lucky they're willing to train you. Don't make waves." He assumed I was being supervised closely, never imagining I had earned the position on merit. My mother expressed concern that the work might be too technical, as though complexity was toxic to daughters. My real mentors became Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead cryptographer, and a small circle of engineers who valued clarity over celebrity. They saw my ability to connect the abstract logic of quantum theory to the practical execution of a commercial chip. They spoke the language of verifiable truth. They treated my ideas as assets, not as female curiosities. This was the environment where I found my true ambition. Every milestone became something I learned to celebrate alone. Small wins, breakthroughs, nights of clarity where deep focus turned into elegant solutions, none of it fit into the Hale family's worldview. I stopped sharing anything beyond general updates and polite reassurances. They stopped asking for more. Over time, their version of me hardened into something unrecognizable, dependable, but unremarkable, supportive, but secondary. They saw me as a placeholder in my own life. Work, on the other hand, saw me. My ideas were heard. My code was trusted. My calculations didn't need a male echo to gain approval. I found mentors who didn't treat me like I was borrowing brilliance. I found colleagues who challenged me. I found problems worth solving and people worth learning from. And most importantly, I found my own ambition, not the kind my parents respected, but the kind that reshaped industries. That gap between who I was becoming and who my family imagined me to be widened year by year, quietly, steadily, like a fault line beneath a polished floor. They never noticed the shift because they never looked closely enough to see the person I was turning into. All they saw was the girl they had decided I was long before I learned how to prove them wrong. A hush swept across the hall the instant the Bloomberg alert interrupted the gala's background music. Conversations tripped over themselves, clinking glasses quieted midair, and dozens of heads turned toward the massive wall-mounted screens flickering above the stage. The shift felt physical, like the entire room inhaled at once. The headline burned brighter than the gold trim on the curtains. Hale Innovate secures historic government contract. CEO Lydia Cho's startup, valued at $20 billion. My name hung there like a slap, lighting the room with the kind of shock that doesn't fade quickly. Guests murmured, trying to connect the announcement to the girl they assumed still scraped by on freelance checks. My father froze with his fork, raised the bite, suspended like he'd forgotten how to move. Champagne spilled from my mother's glass as her fingers twitched. Evan muttered something sharp under his breath, eyes narrowing at the screen as if willing the letters to rearrange themselves into someone else's achievement. Even the gala host paused mid-sentence. "Well," he said with an uneasy chuckle, "it seems we've had breaking news." A delay stretched through the room before the applause began, hesitant at first, then more certain, building into a wave that washed across every table except the one at the center of it all. The Hale family table stayed silent. My mother attempted the kind of smile used in magazine spreads, though panic creased her eyes. "This must be some sort of glitch," she whispered. "Bloomberg doesn't just flash things like that out of nowhere." "They do," I said. "When the valuation clears and the contract is public." My father lowered his fork at last. "Explain this," he demanded, quietly, controlled but trembling under the surface. "You were working on an app or a consulting thing, whatever it was. How does this happen overnight?" "It didn't happen overnight," I replied. "You just never asked." His jaw tightened. "Don't get clever." "What is this contract?" "A national infrastructure upgrade," I said. "The chip technology my team built is the backbone of the new secure grid. The government approved the final phase this afternoon." He stared at me for several seconds, digesting words he'd never expected to hear from his daughter. Not the son he groomed, not the heir he invested in me, the one he dismissed at every dinner, every holiday, every chance he got. The room buzzed with shifting curiosity. People who had ignored me an hour earlier now leaned to get a closer look. Cameras subtly repositioned toward our table. Whispers rose from nearby guests. "Is that her?" "The CEO." "The one on the screen." A couple in evening attire approached with wide smiles. "Congratulations," the woman said warmly. "This is extraordinary news. We had no idea you were in tech at this level." My father attempted to regain footing. "Lydia's always had projects," he said stiffly. "Projects," the man repeated with a laugh. "You're too modest. A valuation like this puts her among the top young CEOs in the country. This is monumental." My mother's hand shook again. She slowly set her champagne flute down before it cracked between her fingers. I thanked the couple and watched them drift away, their excitement trailing behind them. When I turned back to the table, Evan's expression had twisted into something sour. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked. "Why hide this?" "I wasn't hiding," I said. "You just weren't listening," he scoffed. "You think that sounds noble?" "It sounds childish." "What's childish," I answered, "is assuming you're entitled to every chapter of my life." My father leaned forward, lowering his voice into the tone he used for employees he intended to intimidate. "Success is one thing," he said. "Blindly walking into the spotlight is another. You're not prepared for the attention this brings." "I've been preparing for years," I said. "You just didn't see it." The screen above flashed again, a photo now the official corporate portrait taken 3 months ago. I stood in front of the sleek silver Hale Innovate sign, hair pulled back, confidence quiet but unmistakable. The same face now stared down at the gala. Gasps rippled through the tables. Everyone recognized the frame. That corridor belonged to this very venue. The gala host blinked up at the screen. "Isn't that—" "Yes," someone whispered. "Taken in the executive wing here. That's her." Recognition hit my parents at the same moment. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. "You were here," she breathed. "In this building more than once," I said. My father's brows knotted. "Why?" "For contract negotiations." Another wave of whispers washed through the hall, louder this time, undeniable, electric. People angled themselves, suddenly eager to approach, but unsure if they should. A prominent investor stepped forward, first hand extended. "Ms. Cho, if you ever consider expanding your next round, we'd be honored to meet with your team." My father flinched, as if the man had reached past him. I shook the investor's hand calmly. The gesture wasn't triumphant. It simply fit the moment, a recognition of the work that had gotten me there. When he left, silence settled over our table again, a silence with weight, with history, with everything unsaid, pressing against the edges. My father finally spoke, each word forced through disbelief. "You built a $20 billion company and didn't think to involve your own family." "I invited you," I said, "just not into a role you're used to. And what role is that supposed to be? A spectator?" He tried to form an argument, but nothing came out. The man who always had answers suddenly had none. Across the room, the screen continued to cycle through the announcement, the valuation, and my name. No one turned back to their meals. The gala had acquired a new centerpiece, and it wasn't Evan or the Hales or their legacy. Everything orbited the headline, glowing on the wall. My mother whispered something barely audible. "This changes everything." She was wrong. It didn't change anything. It revealed everything. The moment I stood up from the table, the room felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just sharper, like every conversation carried a new edge. People glanced over with curiosity instead of dismissal, and for the first time all evening, my parents didn't know how to position themselves. My mother hurried after me, her heels tapping fast against the floor. "Lydia, stay close," she whispered, adjusting her smile as two donors walked by. "People might misunderstand you if you wander off." She used that word, misunderstand, as if my presence created confusion she needed to manage. I didn't slow down. My father joined us, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his voice holding the sharpness of someone desperately trying to reclaim authority. "A little warning would have been considerate." "There was nothing to warn you about," I replied. "You never asked about my work." Evan caught up, his smile frozen in place for the benefit of onlookers. "You shouldn't have stood up like that," he muttered. "People think you're making a scene." I eased my arm free as he tried to guide me. I didn't storm off. I removed myself from a situation that didn't require my participation. We moved into the periphery of the main hall near the display tables, holding antique maps and rare books intended for auction. The light here was softer, but the surveillance was more intense. I noticed the subtle shift in the body language of the guests. Before the alert, they occupied the space freely secure in their own status. Now they observed me through the lens of verifiable power. Several people whom I recognized only as faces from my parents' holiday cards checked their phones and then looked back at me, calculating the difference between the daughter they dismissed and the CEO they saw on Bloomberg. Before they could press further, a prominent donor and his wife, the Wilkersons, stepped into our small circle. The donor looked polished, mid-60s, the kind who collected influence without needing to advertise it. He greeted my parents first, then focused on me. "And who might she be?" he asked. Mom answered quickly. "Our daughter. She's visiting for the event." The word visiting landed flatly. He turned to me directly. "What do you do?" Dad let out a soft laugh, trying to minimize the moment. "She's still finding her direction." I met the donor's eyes. He wasn't unkind. He was simply trying to fit me into the lineup of roles he assumed every family displayed. "What's your field?" he asked again, this time more pointed. Dad stepped in a bit too fast. "She's not established yet." The donor's gaze flicked between us. Confusion surfaced, subtle but unmistakable. He studied my parents' faces, then mine again, as if recalculating the hierarchy he'd assumed. "I see," he murmured, though his tone said he didn't. Evan tapped the rim of his glass, trying to reclaim the attention. "She helps out where she can," he offered. "Nothing official yet." The donor's wife joined him, scanning our faces. "Everything all right over here?" she asked. Her husband spoke before anyone else could answer. I asked her what she does, and no one seems willing to let her speak. His tone was observational. Mom stiffened. "That's not true. She's simply private. I asked her," he repeated. Mom's eyes darted toward me. "Say something, Lydia." I shook my head. "No." The donor's wife studied me with quiet clarity. "You don't seem lost," she said. "You seem withheld." My father bristled. "That's quite a suggestion." "No," she replied, still looking at me. "It's an observation. Families usually present their strengths proudly. Yours seems hesitant to present her at all." Mom's breath hitched. Dad's jaw tensed. Evan tried to laugh it away, but the sound fell flat. The donor lifted a hand, gently stopping my father from arguing. Then he looked at me one more time. "What do you call what you do?" "I run a $20 billion technology company," I said. "No defense, no performance, just the fact." The donor held my gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod of acknowledgement. His wife offered a sincere smile. They stepped away, clearly uninterested in more Hale family commentary. The silence they left was less awkward than the silence my family created. It was charged with possibility. My focus drifted away from their faces and onto the logistics of the room. I mentally cataloged the number of media cameras present, the estimated size of the crowd, and the likely reach of the Bloomberg alert on the East Coast financial circuit. My father had mentioned I wasn't prepared for this attention. He was correct that I hadn't planned the timing, but he was wrong that I hadn't prepared the facts. Every piece of data, the valuation, the contract, the technology was rigorously built to withstand this exact level of public scrutiny. Before my family could react, a man approached us, someone clearly influential by the way guests stepped aside for him. My father straightened instantly. "Chairman Wexler," he greeted, eager and deferential. The chairman nodded politely, then focused on me. "Ms. Cho, I'd like to speak with you later tonight," he said. "Your work has come up in several discussions." The implication was clear. He wasn't here to speak to my family. My father's expression tightened with confusion and disbelief. My mother's forced smile slipped. Evan's eyes narrowed as though recalculating a formula that suddenly stopped balancing. "Why would he want to talk to you?" Evan asked. "Because he understands the space I work in." "You—" My mother sounded stunned. "He didn't even speak to your father. He didn't need to," I said. Dad exhaled, slow and controlled. "You're misreading this. People here are polite. They'll say anything to make guests feel seen." "He wasn't being polite," I said. "He was being direct." Evan pushed a hand through his hair. "This is getting out of hand. What is you acting like this is normal?" "It is normal," I said. "You just never noticed." I took a moment to absorb the realization settling over their features. It wasn't just shock at the number. It was the dawning awareness that their decades of condescension had been built on a fundamental strategic misjudgment. They had invested time, money, and reputation into one narrative, Evan's path, while completely missing the tectonic shift occurring 2 feet away, my company. This failure wasn't personal. It was a business error measured in billions of dollars and missed influence. Their silence carried disbelief, not acceptance. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't fill the space. Standing there, I realized I no longer felt the familiar pressure to shrink myself so they could stay comfortable. Their confusion didn't belong to me. I stepped away from them, steady and unhurried. Just from a distance, they no longer had the power to close. The applause faded, but the humiliation still clung to the air, thick and heavy. Memories of that night. The night everything collapsed, slid back into place with an ease that frightened me. The gala lights, the music, the polished smiles around me, now only made the contrast sharper. 2 years earlier, I'd stood outside my parents' house in Chicago with freezing hands wrapped around a manila envelope. My proposal sat inside a blueprint for a microchip system I'd spent 18 months developing. This wasn't just a pitch. It included the full schematic for a self-contained unit, utilizing my proprietary dynamic mapping algorithm capable of real-time regulatory checks at the hardware level, the core intellectual property of what would become Chotech. My father had agreed to take a look, though his tone had suggested he'd already made up his mind. Still, I clung to a tiny thread of hope as I walked through the front door. They were waiting in the dining room. My father was at the head of the table. My mother was expressionless. Evan was leaning back as if he'd come for entertainment. A board of directors in designer suits filled the rest of the seats. I recognized the setup immediately, not a meeting a verdict. My father tapped the envelope. "Let's be efficient," he said. "We've reviewed your pitch." My heart lifted an inch. "And it's not viable." I blinked. "The system works. You saw the numbers. The power consumption is 30% below industry standard, and the speed metrics are verifiable." He nodded once. "The numbers look like something a student would bring to a career fair. You're not ready for this level of innovation. The regulatory complexity alone would overwhelm a small team. You have the theory, but you lack the infrastructure, the political capital, and the leadership to scale a product this ambitious." The men around him chuckled politely. My mother looked away. Evan smirked and tapped the table with a single finger, as if marking the moment for later mockery. I stayed standing, the heat rising under my skin. "You said you'd mentor me through the first phase. I said I'd advise you," he corrected, "if you showed potential. You didn't." My chest tightened. "Dad, you didn't even give feedback. You skimmed it. You didn't look at the power efficiency metrics or the self-correction logic that took me 6 months to optimize." "A CEO doesn't skim," he said coldly. "A CEO scans and identifies weaknesses. Your plan has too many." The sting spread deeper, like a bruise forming from the inside out. Weaknesses like what? The lack of capital funding, or the fact that the inventor is female and not Evan, lack of leadership experience, no investment background, no proven record, no ability to operate under pressure, he responded, pausing to let each accusation sink in. "You are not the future of this house or this company. Frankly, Lydia, this kind of work requires a public face. People trust a leader who already operates in these circles." My mother gave a tight nod, as if agreeing was the polite thing to do. He slid another folder across the table. "This is what we'll do. Evan will take over the project. He has the discipline for it. We can rebrand your prototype as the seed technology for a new compliance division under his oversight. It will give the IP the proper backing it needs." My brother grinned wide, sharp, satisfied. "Don't take it personally," he said. "Business has to run on reality." The room blurred for a moment, and I had to grip the chair beside me to stay upright. "So you're giving him my work. You're taking my patented algorithm and erasing my name from the ownership chain." My father's answer was almost boring. "He'll make it workable. He'll turn the theory into a commercial reality. We'll credit you as a contributor, of course." The injustice hit like a fist. The technology was mine. The research was mine. The prototype was mine. They were rewriting that in real time right in front of me, as if I didn't exist. I stepped closer to the table. "You don't get to erase me." Evan's smirk deepened. "You'd know if you'd ever built anything worth remembering. You'll get paid for the IP transfer, don't worry about that." The board laughed again. Something inside me cracked, not a breakdown, but the quiet death of needing their approval. The kind of fracture that changes the direction of a person's life forever. "I'll rebuild it on my own," I said. "Without you." My father let out a soft, condescending breath. "Sweetheart, you don't rebuild without resources. You don't rebuild without backing. You don't rebuild without a name people trust. You have none of those. You have no idea how hard it is to secure Series A funding outside of family circles. I'll build my own name. A name is earned through power," he said. "And you have none." He said it so casually, as if it were a fact of nature, as if he weren't destroying something precious and calling it guidance. I held his gaze. "You're going to regret this." Evan laughed outright. "The only thing we'll regret is wasting our time tonight." I walked out without another word. Not because they'd won, but because arguing with people who enjoyed diminishing me was pointless. Outside, a cold wind cut across my face. I didn't wipe away the tears because they weren't from weakness, they were from clarity. For the first time, I understood my place in my family. Invisible until they needed someone to blame, replaceable unless I became useful to their ambitions, forgettable unless I achieved something they wanted control over. That night, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. Every notebook, every sketch, every file, every late-night idea scribbled in fading ink. I made multiple encrypted backups of the core algorithm and the power consumption data, ensuring I retained full legal ownership of the IP. I stored my prototype at a friend's apartment, then boarded a flight to Denver, Colorado, a city known for its low-profile tech incubator scene and a less competitive funding landscape than Boston or Chicago. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't leave a note. Starting over was supposed to feel liberating. It didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no parachute and no ground beneath me. But fear didn't stop me. I'd spent too many years letting fear shape my choices. The first apartment I rented barely qualified as livable. The pipes clanged all night, the radiator hissed steam into the air like a dragon, and the windows let in snow even when shut. My savings thinned fast. I took on part-time work copywriting for tech blogs, consulting for small inventors, anything that kept the lights on. I coded in the laundry room because it was the only space with decent ventilation and a power outlet that didn't flicker. I lived entirely on the verifiable truth of my code, where the results were black and white, and the opinions of my family were irrelevant noise. But at night, the prototype glowed on my desk. The same device my father had dismissed as amateurish. The same idea my brother tried to steal. The same vision they thought they could bury. Those nights I built, brick by brick, line by line, failure after failure, until the failures started to sharpen into something that resembled progress. 1 year later, the first working beta was complete. 6 months after that, a seed investor wrote the first check with shaking hands. Another year later, my team and I stood in a rented office space with peeling paint signing the contract that would change everything. Looking around the gala now, at my parents struggling to contain shock, at Evan shrinking in his chair, at the guests whispering like they were witnessing a coronation they hadn't prepared for, I felt none of what I'd felt the night I left Chicago. No grief. Their reactions didn't stir the old wounds. Everything that used to hurt had burned off long before tonight. What stayed in its place was clarity. The moment had come full circle. They tried to erase me. Instead, they cleared the path. The house looked exactly the same on the outside porch light, glowing curtains drawn the neat little yard my mother obsessed over, but nothing about it felt like home when I pulled into the driveway that evening, days after the gala. Their text message had been abrupt, presumptive, and so deeply familiar. "Be here tomorrow at 6. We need to talk. No question, no courtesy, just the expectation that I would show up because that's what I'd always done." I didn't ring the doorbell. The knob turned easily under my hand, and the warm light from the foyer spilled across the floor. Voices drifted from the dining room. My father's impatience, my mother's anxious fluttering, Evan's smooth confidence threading through every other sound. Dad straightened the moment he saw me step inside. Finally, he said, as if I'd inconvenienced them by arriving at the exact time they demanded. Mom moved fast, smoothing her blouse and forcing a smile. "Let's sit down. We've been waiting." Evan leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of someone who thought this entire meeting revolved around him. I stayed standing. "Say whatever you plan to say." Mom blinked, unsettled by the tone-flat calm and absolutely done. "Honey, you don't have to be defensive. We're just worried." Dad folded his hands like he was opening a disciplinary hearing. "This valuation news, $20 billion, it's dangerous. Too fast. Too public. You need guidance before you make a mistake you can't walk back. The market volatility alone at this scale requires a seasoned advisory council." A slow breath settled into my chest. "You mean control?" Evan cut in before Dad could respond. "We want to help you make decisions. Big decisions, strategic decisions. You're still new to all this. Specifically, Dad and I believe the company needs immediate legal counsel on the governance structure. We propose a non-dilutive mutual oversight agreement." Funny, I said. I don't remember anyone offering help when I worked 2 jobs and coded through the night in the laundry room. Mom flinched. Dad's jaw locked. Evan smirked like I'd just confirmed whatever story he'd written in his head about me being too emotional for leadership. Dad leaned forward. You're overwhelmed. Anyone can see that. This is why families step in, to protect each other. The federal defense contract you signed exposes you to political risk you don't comprehend. We can mitigate that by providing a layer of established political and financial expertise. From what your own inexperience. The room didn't echo. It throbbed. I built Hale Innovate without any of you. I secured investors on my own. I filed every LLC document. I ran every pitch meeting. Not one person in this room lifted a finger. My current legal team has secured the IP and vetted the contract. You are attempting to solve a risk problem that does not exist. Evan exhaled a laugh, short, dismissive. Lydia, come on! You had a roof. You had food. You had a stable home because Mom and Dad worked hard. You didn't build this alone. That foundation means we deserve a voice in how you manage its success. That roof, I said softly, was the place you told me my ideas were unrealistic. That food came with a side of criticism every night I didn't measure up to you. Mom's voice wavered. We didn't criticize you. We tried to keep you grounded. You kept me small. Dad slammed his palm against the table. Enough. This bitterness helps no one. You're acting irrational, hard-headed. You've let success warp your sense of judgment. We are talking about billions of dollars in national security contracts. You cannot handle that volume of complexity with a chip on your shoulder. Irrational. Because I set boundaries. You're disrespectful, he fired back. And disrespect leads to bad decisions. The decision that worries you is that I said no to you, I countered. What decision worries you? Dad's eyes flicked toward Evan before settling on me. We think the company needs oversight, real oversight, shared authority. The structure must be amended to include a non-executive board chair which your mother and I would nominate. It's standard practice for a Series F company. There it is, I murmured. You assume I haven't already established a non-executive board chair who has more experience in the sector than you combined. Mom rushed in again. This is for stability, for your safety, so you don't burn out or make a catastrophic mistake. We are asking you to recognize the wisdom that comes with age and experience. A faint smile tugged at my mouth. Why wasn't anyone this concerned when Evan crashed Dad's car or lost $10,000 gambling in college? Where was the wisdom when he failed the bar exam the first time? Evan's posture stiffened. That's irrelevant. It's extremely relevant. Dad's voice cut the air. Enough dragging your brother. He's trying to help. No, I said. He's trying to inherit a company he didn't build. And the mutual oversight agreement you drafted attempts to bypass my existing fiduciary duties to my shareholders, Mom whispered. That's not fair. Fair. My voice wasn't raised, but everything inside me sharpened. You told me to stop dreaming. You told Evan to go conquer the world. You told me to be grateful. You told Evan he deserved more. I learned the business logic from my shareholders who value performance over pedigree. Silence settled across the table, heavy and undeniable. Dad cleared his throat. This attitude isn't sustainable. You will sit with us, sign a mutual governance agreement, and allow the family to manage risk. A breath left my lungs slowly. No. The word hit harder than any argument. Dad stood. Excuse me. You heard me. Mom pressed her hands together. Lydia, sweetheart, I'm not signing anything. I'm not handing control to anyone. And I'm not pretending this intervention is about my well-being. This is an attempt at a hostile acquisition disguised as family concern. Evan scoffed. You're impossible. I'm independent. Dad's face reddened. If your company collapses, don't crawl back here expecting us to fix it. The Hale name is not a safety net for reckless entrepreneurship. I'd never come back for that. Mom's voice cracked. So you'll just walk away from your family. I'm walking away from the version of my family that only values power when it benefits them. Evan rose from his chair, finger pointed in accusation. So that's it. Now that you're rich, we're beneath you. No, I said, but you're behind me. That's the part you can't accept. You are lagging the industry, not leading it. Mom reached toward me, desperation bleeding into her voice. "Can't we talk about this like adults? I have talked," I said, "for years." Nobody listened. Dad started again, but I cut him off. "You don't get to demand loyalty from someone you taught to doubt herself." I picked up my bag. The weight felt lighter than it ever had in that house. Mom's voice trembled. "Please don't walk out." "That depends." Dad's eyes narrowed. "On what?" "Whether you treat me like an adult or an asset." They didn't answer because they already knew the truth. A quiet resolve settled through my body. You didn't lose your daughter tonight. You lost your leverage. And with that, I stepped out of the dining room through the front door and into the night air that felt shockingly cool compared to the suffocating heat inside. I reached my car with the calm certainty of someone who'd finally stopped asking for permission to exist. Leaving didn't hurt. Staying had hurt far more. And the silence, their silence as I drove away, said everything they didn't dare say out loud. When I rejoined the gala crowd, I kept my distance from my parents' table, choosing instead to stand near the stage where the music was louder and the lights were brighter. My mind was still sharp from the confrontation with the Wilkersons and the initial shock. I knew I wouldn't sit through another round of polished insults. Evan found me leaning against a column near the dessert display. He didn't use his normal smooth approach. His movements were agitated, calculated. He had spent years performing as the strategic thinker, and my sudden undeniable success had stripped that pretense. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice low. "Why refuse to sit back down? Dad is furious you're wandering." "I'm not wandering," I replied. "I'm taking space," he scoffed. "You're being childish. This is a family event, not a press conference for your startup." He still couldn't bring himself to use the word company. "You're entitled to your opinion," I said, "but you don't get to set my schedule." Evan lowered his voice further, his expression shifting from superior to desperate. "Look, if the valuation is real, there's liability. Government contracts, that's massive legal exposure. You can't handle that risk profile alone. You need someone with a legal background." He adjusted his tie. "You need me." He tried to position himself as the necessary safety net, the expert I couldn't succeed without. "And what exactly would you be managing, Evan?" I asked. "Compliance risk assessment." "The fact that my platform automates real-time compliance, something your firm will probably pitch in 5 years. His confidence wavered. "You're using technical jargon. You don't understand the larger picture." "What's the larger picture?" "Assuming the company is too complex for me to run, then taking control." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "We just want to protect the investment, the family name." I looked him directly in the eye. "You didn't invest anything. You tried to take my work 2 years ago and hand it over to yourself. You only see an investment now because it's too big to ignore." The statement hit him squarely. His face hardened. He tried to speak, but the words caught. I pressed the advantage not out of spite, but for clarity. "Do you remember when you tried to dismiss my coding puzzle as luck in high school? Or when you accepted a full scholarship to your Ivy League school and told me I should be grateful for thrift store textbooks?" He glared. "That's irrelevant history. It's extremely relevant," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Every step of my life you convinced yourself that your success was earned through merit and mine was either lucky or non-existent. You always positioned yourself to supervise my potential." "That's not fair," he muttered. "We were encouraging you." "You weren't encouraging me, Evan. You were simply managing my expectations to protect your own narrative." I corrected, my voice calm but absolute. "You built your career on the foundation Dad provided, on prestige, on networking, on the Hale name. I had to build mine on verifiable data, on code that worked, and on problems that only I could solve." I stepped closer, maintaining the physical space that now separated us in status. "That's the fundamental gap. You're trying to validate my company using Dad's old rules, but the industry already validated it with billions of dollars and federal contracts. You can't supervise something you don't understand, and you can't advise on a success you spent decades trying to suppress." A brief, sharp silence settled between us. He had no answer. He had been so focused on proving himself superior that he never realized the system he relied on was rigged in his favor, and I had simply opted out of it. I took a final, steady breath. "You weren't the enemy, Evan. You were the obstacle." The line landed clean and final. His expression shifted, not angry, but profoundly lost. He stepped back the column, now supporting his weight instead of mine. He watched me as I turned and walked away. The conversation wasn't about the valuation anymore. It was about the cost of underestimation, a cost they were finally paying with their sense of control. My father insisted on making pancakes that morning, even though he flipped them with the same distracted focus he used whenever he tried to fix something he didn't understand. The dining table felt smaller than usual. No gala lights, no orchestra, no polished strangers brushing past us. Just 4 chairs, a bottle of maple syrup, and a family trying to pretend nothing had shifted. The silence had a weight to it, something new, something cautious. My mother kept straightening the napkins. Evan scrolled his phone, but wasn't actually reading anything. My father finally broke the quiet. The $20 billion valuation, he said, stirring his coffee. Though he'd already added sugar, these markets swing all the time. Tech companies get inflated. It's normal. You know as well as I do that a Series F round often includes a hype factor to justify the investor exit strategy. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man trying to reassure himself. My mother nodded, quick and nervous. Exactly. Remember that scooter company that was worth billions and then went bankrupt? These things happen. Investors get excited. Evan leaned back in his chair. And a lot of AI companies juice numbers to look good for rounds. It's the playbook. I spent the morning running comps. If your EBITDA projections are realistic, the valuation might hold, but I doubt your burn rate is under control. He tossed his phone onto the table. Valuation doesn't mean profit. People forget that. I watched them talk circles around the same idea. If they framed my company as temporary or unstable, the world would make sense again. Chotech isn't a scooter company, I said. And we don't inflate metrics. Our revenue model is based on long-term government SaaS agreements, not consumer adoption. My father raised a brow. You don't know what investors do behind the scenes, Lydia. You don't understand the pressure they put on founders to deliver unrealistic growth. Dad, I said I negotiated every round. I set the growth ceiling based on our current chip fabrication capacity and our R&D spend. I rejected 2 offers that demanded a higher growth rate because it was unsustainable. He blinked as if the thought hadn't occurred to him. My mother folded her napkin again and again. What exactly does Chotech even sell? I still don't understand why they kept saying your platform was mission critical. It sounds dramatic. I kept my tone even. Our predictive engine handles infrastructure analytics, emergency routing, logistics forecasting. Government contract pilots started 18 months ago. The mission-critical designation comes from our chip's ability to secure real-time supply chain data under quantum threat protocols. It's a verifiable technical necessity, not a marketing term. The napkin in my mother's hand stopped moving. Evan tapped a knuckle against the table. Government, as in federal. Which agencies are currently running the pilot? Yes, Department of Commerce, Defense Logistics Agency, and the Treasury. He took a slow breath, processing. How big 7-year pipeline, I answered. Multi-tier adoption model, strong renewal probability. The initial contract alone is structured to cover full operational costs for the next 3 quarters. He stared at me in a way he never had, growing up calculating, not dismissive. My father pushed his plate aside. You're telling me agencies rely on your tool like they actually use it? If they rely on your technology for logistics, that means a failure on your end could have national security implications. They do. That is why our platform includes the only certified dynamic audit trail in the sector. The next minute passed without anyone reaching for their food. Evan tried again. What are your retention numbers? If you are selling enterprise, SaaS retention is the only real metric, 91% rolling. The contracts include a built-in regulatory friction cost that makes churn financially illogical. His eyes widened before he masked it. He understood retention. He understood what 91% meant. My father sat straighter, shifting into a tone I recognized from years of him giving guidance. But scaling at that level brings risks, legal exposure, infrastructure strain. You should consider stepping back and hiring an experienced CEO. Someone who's been through hypergrowth before. A founder stepping aside for an experienced operator is a sign of maturity in the investment community. I shook my head. I've been through it. I oversaw the architectural transition from a monolithic design to a scalable microservices architecture 6 months ago. The infrastructure strain is budgeted and mitigated. He hesitated. You've been through the early stages, sure, but running something this big? I've been running something this big for a while. I learned hypergrowth from the ground up, not from a textbook. He fell quiet again. Evan drummed his fingers against his knee, processing the implications. If the valuation holds, he muttered, you'll move into enterprise dominance within 2 years. The political exposure alone will put you in direct contact with congressional committees. I nodded once. That was the accurate timeline. He swallowed, and I saw the realization settle. He had misread the entire field market trajectory, industry direction, and most of all me. My phone buzzed on the table. An email notification slid across the screen. U.S. Department of Commerce Roundtable Invitation, Critical Infrastructure and Emerging Tech. My mother leaned forward without meaning to. Is that normal? She asked. Agencies reaching out like that, is that a meeting about procurement? It's normal for companies leading a niche. It's an advisory panel meeting. They want to know the future of the sector, and they want my input. The room shifted. Not dramatically, not explosively, just enough for everyone to register that this world, the world I operated in, did not resemble the one they assumed I occupied. Evan broke the silence. So when people said you were one of the top founders to watch, that wasn't hype. You actually lead the discourse in this technical space. I looked at him. It was accurate. He nodded slowly, absorbing more than he said. My father leaned forward. If this continues, you'll influence policy. That kind of influence is not something we can ignore. It affects everything. We already do. Another silence edged in, but this one wasn't hostile. It was the quiet of people recalibrating. People realizing their assumptions were outdated. People who had underestimated the wrong person for too long. I stood from the table. I need to get to a meeting, I said. No one stopped me. No one instructed me. No one corrected me. My father simply nodded once, a gesture stripped of pride or condescension, just acknowledgement. I took my coat from the chair. We'll talk later. My mother blinked, still processing everything she had heard. Evan looked at me with something close to respect. I stepped toward the door, and the room remained still behind me. The dynamic had changed. Their understanding had changed. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the first time they saw the gap between the story they believed and the reality I lived. Clarity didn't need permission. It only needed truth. The gala continued behind me, but I did not need the room anymore. I needed focus. I walked outside, crossed the valet circle, and entered the car I had hired for the night. Inside the cabin, the world narrowed to a dim dashboard and the quiet structure I had built for years. I opened my laptop. The dashboard loaded instantly. Metrics appeared in clear blocks, server load latency, and incoming traffic. Each value stayed within the expected range. Chotek's internal console loaded immediately, displaying real-time indicators. Server load 63%. Traffic increase from the Bloomberg alert rising but controlled. Compliance engine latency under 22 milliseconds. Everything remained stable. A message appeared from the Chief Technology Officer. The spike is steady. I'm adjusting the autoscaler to handle projected overnight flow. The system is holding. The tone was brief and efficient. It was the language I relied on. My phone vibrated with a steady stream of notifications, partnership requests, interview invitations, and 2 panel requests from conferences I had once watched through live streams. A senior official from the Department of Commerce requested a briefing as soon as possible. None of it altered my pulse. The system performed as designed. The work was held. Another message arrived from our largest enterprise client. We saw the coverage. We want to accelerate Phase 3. Can we meet Monday? I replied. I will schedule it. Phase 3 is feasible with a 2-week preparation window. No hype, no performance, only action. My family had insisted for years that I required their guidance. The quiet car made the truth clear. My competence did not depend on their belief. I reviewed the regulatory queue next. 43 pending items, 9 marked urgent. I opened the first request and inquiry from the Department of the Treasury about cross-border compliance mapping. The task was straightforward. I drafted a response describing the encryption chain, attached the validated audit, and forwarded the packet to my policy team. Decision, execution, documentation. This rhythm defined my actual life, the one none of them had ever attempted to understand. Another email entered my inbox. From the Dean of Hale University, subject invitation to keynote our winter forum. Under it was a message from 2 years earlier, the same dean declining my offer to guest lecture. His explanation stated that undergraduate-level coding insights are not suitable for our graduate program. He had copied his assistant by accident. I archived the message without comment. The new tone was urgent. We believe your work represents the future of secure systems. Our faculty would be honored to hear from you. I replied with one sentence, I am unavailable this season. Next year may be possible. Not revenge, prioritization. The car remained warm. A light drizzle touched the windshield. I looked outside for a moment, observing the city's lights without attaching meaning to them. They simply existed. This was the first night in years when my thoughts were not shaped by arguments, dismissals, or expectations. There was no father interrupting me. There was no brother offering unsolicited advice. There was no mother reducing my work to a hobby. My decisions were direct. My direction belonged to me. A new notification arrived from the chief executive officer of a Fortune 100 company. 3 years ago, he had rejected my pitch and dismissed my chip prototype as a niche experiment. Now he wanted immediate onboarding. I reviewed the request, checked system capacity, evaluated potential strain, and forwarded it to legal with a note draft terms with a premium rate clause. No exclusivity. My younger self would have felt vindicated. My current self felt nothing except clarity. I closed the laptop and stayed still. The light from the street reflected faintly on the car window, diffuse and quiet. I did not crave applause or recognition. The functionality of the system was enough. It had always been enough. My independence was not an act of rebellion. It was a structure I had built deliberately, task by task, choice by choice. I checked the time. Midnight. My parents probably noticed my absence at the table, but they understood that calling me would not change anything. Their opinions no longer influenced the work in front of me. I instructed the driver to take me home. When I entered my apartment, a quiet loft overlooking the river, I placed my laptop on the counter and poured a glass of water. The silence filled the room in a steady, unobtrusive way. There were no footsteps and no demands, only me and the company I had built. Before going to bed, I opened one final dashboard, the 7-year growth projection. The graph rose in a clear upward line. There was nothing else to interpret. The data spoke clearly. I turned off the lights and let the room settle. I did not feel triumphant or emotional. I felt grounded. Tonight was not a victory, it was operation, and that was enough. I arrived at my parents' house the next evening without expecting a particular outcome. The porch light was on. My mother opened the door without her usual enthusiasm. "Dinner is ready," she said. Her tone was neutral. The dining table had 3 plates and nothing else. No decorations, no attempts to create an impression. It looked like a meal, not a performance. I sat down. They followed. My father spoke first. I watched the interview from start to finish. "Your explanation of the system architecture was clear. I understood why the contract was approved. This was acknowledgement, not flattery." My mother rested her hands on the table. "People called the house today. Reporters, old colleagues, relatives. We told them we would not comment. This was the first time they treated my work as something that belonged to me." My father shifted slightly. "You presented ideas for years. We dismissed them." "That was a mistake." His voice stayed steady. He was not trying to defend old choices. "You didn't fail in those early attempts," he continued. "We failed to evaluate them properly." I kept my tone direct. "I'm not trying to correct the past. I only want accuracy going forward." My mother nodded. "We understand. We won't try to redirect you again." "That is necessary," I said. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Not uncomfortable, just clear. After dinner, we moved to the sitting room. No one tried to create small talk. They waited. "What is next for the company?" my father asked. expansion into additional regions, strengthening policy partnerships, funding a research program for university labs. He processed this without judgment. You have the structure for it. I do. The Foundation's board asked if I wanted to release a statement about the valuation, he said. I declined. Why? It is your achievement. If I commented, it would imply ownership. This answer was straightforward. It matched the tone of the evening. When it was time to leave, he walked me to the door. You did not have to speak with us again, he said. You chose to. I wanted to establish new terms, I replied, not repair old ones. That is reasonable. My mother placed a scarf around my neck. Drive safely, she said. No added instructions. I stepped outside. The air was cold, and the quiet was consistent. This time it felt like we were operating on defined boundaries rather than old assumptions. The distance was intentional, not emotional. It gave each of us room to move without repeating what had already failed. When I returned to my apartment, the lobby was empty. The doorman handed me a small package without a sender listed. Inside was a framed printout of the Bloomberg alert from the Gala. A short, handwritten line from my father sat below it. You earned the space you have now. Keep using it. Dad. I set the frame on the entry table. It was not decoration. It served as a record of the moment the dynamic finally changed. My phone vibrated once. A message from Evan read, "Tonight was real. I am trying." I answered with a direct line, "I am trying as well." No analysis, no justification, only confirmation that we were adjusting. Before going to bed, I prepared a sentence for the Foundation's newsletter. Progress is the decision to continue. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to sleep as someone who no longer needed approval to move forward. I arrived at the office before 7 in the morning. The building was quiet. The city was still waking up. I walked straight to the conference room without stopping for coffee or conversation. The chief technology officer opened the meeting. Server load remained stable overnight. The system handled the new traffic without reaching any limits. Good, I said. Prioritize the enterprise accounts. Move the non-essential sign-ups to next week. The policy director added, the Department of Commerce wants a briefing. The Defense Logistics Agency wants an audit. The Department of the Treasury is asking for clarification on the new compliance layer. Schedule the audit first, I replied. Their team works faster when we give them a clear starting point. The strategist noted the instruction. I will block Thursday for it. We moved to product updates. The hardware timeline was tight but still viable. The encryption team requested an additional budget for testing. I approved it. Delayed testing creates more operational risk than the additional cost. At 9 o'clock, a logistics corporation joined through a video call. Their chief operating officer spoke directly. We are ready to finalize the 7-year contract, he said. We need assurance that your system will not disrupt our legacy infrastructure. It will not, I answered. We will deploy a compatibility layer within 6 weeks. That timeline works, he replied. The documents were exchanged. I reviewed the contract, adjusted one clause, and signed it. There was no celebration. It was simply another task completed. A congressional advisor called next. He requested details about our failure response protocol and throughput limits. Our thresholds are documented, I said. I will send the latest model by noon. He accepted the answer and ended the call. By midday, I had closed 3 internal decisions, approved 1 external partnership, and completed 2 advisory calls. The pace matched the stage of the company. High-growth operations do not slow down for personal history. I returned to my office. The space was minimal, a desk, a monitor, and whiteboards filled with metrics and diagrams. Nothing decorative. Simplicity helped me concentrate. A notification appeared on the laptop, Department of Commerce Procurement Agreement, ready for final approval. I read the document line by line, corrected one technical detail, and signed it. The confirmation timestamp appeared immediately. My assistant knocked. Your advisory panel has arrived. I invited them in. 4 specialists with clear experience and no personal connection to my family. They reviewed expansion plans, examined risk exposure, and asked for precise numbers. I answered with the data we had and marked the areas where we still needed additional verification. The systems architect closed his folder. The timeline is tight but possible. That is enough, I said. When the meeting ended, the office became quiet again. There was no tension. It was a standard workday. At 6 p.m, I shut down my laptop. The hallway lights were already dim. Staff members were leaving the building. I did not wait for anyone. I walked outside and stopped on the sidewalk. The air was cold. Cars passed by. Nothing symbolic. It was simply the end of a long day. My phone vibrated. A message from the Chief Technology Officer. "We can begin the next deployment whenever you are ready." I typed back, "Begin the deployment." Then I put the phone away and walked down the street. The day was not a turning point. It was routine. It was the next step in the